Okay, so let's begin. We've got three great speakers with us today, so I want to get us going. So this is the data écoculture session, of course. We've got a great panel today focused specifically on examples of data sharing. What are the various models and how to choose one that meets your needs. And I will provide intros in a few minutes, but let's just kind of kick it off. We've got an hour together. My name is Jean-Noé Landry. I'm the executive director of Open North. We're a Montreal-based not-for-profit organization specialized in the responsible and effective use of data and technology in the public interest. While our roots are in the open data community, our applied research lab has done a lot of research and developing data governance and data sharing models and approaches for different sectors, including the cultural sector. And I'm also on the board of directors of Synapse, and very excited to be your moderator for today's session because we get to talk about the specifics. How does the kind of theory actually play out in real life by a diversity of different organizations? And for our audience in this session, you can expect questions that are going to talk about for each of those models around kind of data ownership. What are the regulatory kind of compliance issues that our panelists have kind of dealt with, issues of interoperability, data quality, access. So it should be a fun session. So let's get into it. Before we do so, I just want to make a proper acknowledgement as well. So from where I'm speaking, I'm on the land of the St. Lawrence Iroquois, Mohawk, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee peoples on what is now known as the island of Montreal. We acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who prior to and after the arrival of the French encountered one another on the territory of the island of Montreal. In terms of the way that it's going to play out, so do also join the conversation on social media using the hashtag data écoculture. We have a live transcriber for the session itself. So please select your language of choice. You've got choice between French and English by clicking on the options at the bottom of the Zoom window. The session is recorded and will be retransmitted. So if you do not agree to appear on the recording, simply just turn off your camera. And in terms of the flow of the conversation that we're going to have today, I'm going to do a quick intro of our three panelists or contributors to the discussion. They're each going to have about 5 minutes to tell us about their work. So they're going to describe what they do and how they do their work. I'm going to then ask them each a question after the three of them have done that. And then we're going to open it up for discussion. So I'm going to be asking questions that relate to kind of each of them or for multiple different examples that have been provided to us. And of course, you know, in the remarks and in the responses by each of our panelists, I'm also inviting them to maybe comment on each other's work as well. I think we want this to be as dynamic and interactive. I think you'll see that there's commonalities in the work that we're about to be exposed to, but obviously some specifics because of the different contexts. So without further ado, let me just introduce our three panelists and speakers for today. So we have David Phillips. Hi, David. So David is the president and COO of NLogic. So NLogic is privileged to work with Canada's largest broadcasters, media agencies, and advertisers, helping them turn data into action through software and insights. We also have Leo Sharrock, who's the product owner, of the audience agency, SaaS and PaaS product offering. He has over 20 years of experience working with arts and cultural organizations to help them use audience data and insight to make better decisions and drive business planning and audience development. Greetings, Leo. And we also have Christian Liboiron, chargé de projet mutualisation at Culture pour tous, where he is mobilizing and forming an intersectorial and interregional network around a web platform project whose objective is to inform and train the cultural sector on the importance of digital issues and also to share data from culture in a data trust. So lots of innovative things to touch on. So without further ado, let's kick it off with David. Over to you to tell us the work that you're doing and the model that you've developed.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. And just so you know, when my mum asks me what I do, whatever I say, she still doesn't really understand it. And that's not on her, that's on me. So the company I run called NLogic, we work primarily with audience data for TV and radio. So that's TV and radio in its traditional forms and also in its growing evolution in digital form. So we essentially help on the programming side, on the content side, people understand how many people are listening or watching particular things, where they're watching. And on the sales side, how much should you charge for stuff? We also help with like how that transaction takes place. So the data we deal with is typically from Numeris, and Numeris is a not-for-profit industry organization that collects audience estimates. So, and you have to be a member to have access to it, although you'll see examples of it in the press every now and again when people say this many people watched a particular show or listened to a particular radio station. So that's what we do, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And I have noisy children who are really bad at staying quiet when they're supposed to stay quiet. So if you see or hear me yelling at them or vice versa, apologies in advance.
Well, you might hear my dog in the background too. So I think we've come to kind of appreciate each other's kind of family settings here. Thank you, David, to kind of break the ice, so to speak. And we'll come back to you after the two other the short intros with a question. So let's go next to Leo. Over to you, Leo.
Thanks, Jean-Noé. And yes, the commonality starts straight away, David. I can't explain to my mother or my wife or my kids in a 12-word lift pitch what it is that I do either. I'm still working on that one and have been for years and years. But I'm product director at the Audience Agency, and I work with the team who develop and maintain the Audience Finder service. And Audience Finder in the UK is essentially a massive data sharing exercise where cultural organizations, it works on a kind of give and gain model. They give their audience data and they gain intelligence and contextualization and a common language and a whole host of features from the aggregated data set that we're able to build up. We've been running the service for about 8 years now. We have about 1,000 cultural organizations who've been using the service across that time. And we're in the process of developing a version for Canada, which we'll be bringing to Quebec in the near future. We're working with Synapse, very excited to be working with Synapse on that development. And across that whole period of time, we've what we really tried to do with Audience Finder is enable cultural organizations to understand who their audiences are and how they compare to the audiences of other cultural organizations and to the population at large. So you can really understand what your present reach is and who your audiences might be if you continue to offer the same program, or if you offer it, what would the likely impact be on your audience, and what would be the best way to communicate that to audiences based on what other cultural organizations have experienced and the knowledge you can share across the piece. We in the course of doing that, we've learned a lot about how we give information to cultural organizations so they can extract value from that data, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities in that. And we've also, Jean-Noé talked about the kind of governance issues. When we first started out down this road, there was an awful lot of suspicion about what are we doing with this data, and you know, why is it good for me? And kind of until people see what a thing is, it's very difficult to convince people. So there's been a journey for us as an organization providing this service, which we've gone on over the years, and we've kind of taken all of our users with us on that journey. We've kind of navigated GDPR, which in Europe has been this massive data protection regulation challenge that we've had to kind of rise to. And actually, we've kind of embraced that, really, as many people have, as an opportunity to serve audiences on a basis that they're really comfortable with. So it's been a really kind of interesting journey. We continually going on that journey to kind of work out how we can make data more and more useful to organizations, and how we can kind of grow with the developing ecology and different data types and adding more users and more value to the data that we've got. So that's us, that's the audience agency.
That's great. Thank you. And I could think of several questions that actually overlap between you and David here. So before getting into those, let's get into learning a bit more about Christian, if you may, please.
Yeah, bonjour à tous. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and discuss the project Culture pour tous is starting very shortly. And if I can just start with the concept, and we have the project, but we didn't start from scratch because there was 1 year before. So I'm very lucky when I started 2 weeks ago, to have a kind of a roadmap of what to do next. So the concept itself is like a network of different sector of the cultural sector, so music, books, and visual arts. We also aim to gather all Canadian francophonie. So it's a mostly like we want to gather all the organization in different regions. So it's not only about like Montreal or Quebec, it's also French Canada. And that network is also to support the trust, the data trust. And I would just mention like readily the trust in English or in Canada for the Commonwealth is totally different. It's different from the trust in Quebec, which is really more versatile, I would say. So I would say when I was talking about data trust, I would say Quebec data trust, which gives more latitude to work with, especially governance. Like so we're very conscious about our governance is very important, and to start with that, and also interoperability. Sorry about that. So what we aim, in fact, is to do a network of data interconnectivity within cultural organization in Quebec and Canada. So the concept is like the network itself and the data trust together, and how we will put that with cultural organization is to have a platform. So we will start with an MVP or VPM, like a minimum viable product. So that platform will make available the data to the beneficiary, and we decided to go with that model of fiducie d'utilité sociale, which is, I don't know, usable. Anyway, I won't translate that. I will let. So this trust has a way to ensure good governance. So we will start with that, and first of all, where the first next step will be to consolidate our partnership, because that roadmap that I had was a work that was done the first year, so last year, by Culture pour tous and La Cogency, which is the partner for that project. They did information monitoring, they did consultation across Canada, French Canada, and also they did workshop of co-design. They came up with 14 prototypes. So with all that, I'm not starting from scratch, and next step will be to create that platform and have it as a beta platform. And we have like 6 other partners in Quebec and Canada to have beta tests and also participate in evaluating. For the first thing I would say for cultural organization right now is to evaluate where the data are and how to clean it or to manage it properly, so it would be interconnected. So the aim is to think right now about the data as their own needs, but also for the needs of the cultural sector in general. So that would be a challenge.
That's great. Excellent. And thank you very much. I think that gives us a good sense of how the initiative is moving forward. So I'd like to maybe kind of ask a question to David and Leo, then Christian. David, I'm wondering if you could kind of drill down on maybe a little bit more details around the type of data access, maybe challenges that you might be kind of facing in terms of like quality data, but then kind of maybe barriers to accessing the data that you're using through your work. If you can kind of hone in on a few examples of those to kind of give us a little sense of specifics here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of them are, a lot of them seem technological, but they also have, as all these things do, some political and commercial elements that are fairly strong too. So essentially what the data is we're usually looking at, what we're trying to capture is total viewing and listening to video and audio, which is on the surface quite a simple thing to do. Okay, if I'm watching a TV show, if I'm watching a whatever it is, I can now watch that in different ways. I can watch that through the traditional means. I can also watch that on an app that belongs to a particular broadcaster, or I can watch it on catch up. I can watch it at different times, or I can watch something that's totally outside what was deemed to be like the ecosystem. I can watch something on Netflix or Disney Plus or YouTube. So it seems a fairly simple ask, but actually gets very complicated quite quickly. So the challenges we have are, it's fairly straightforward to measure things within what you deem to be a kind of national ecosystem. So, you know, if you're looking at Quebecor and CBC, SRC and the likes, and similarly with radio, where it gets challenging because it's all broadcast, it's all literally cast broadly to everyone. So it can be picked up and everyone can understand what that means. Where it gets more difficult is where you have a lot of that consumption behind walls. So obviously everyone's heard of the phrase walled garden, but you know, Facebook doesn't share the data that it has around who watches video on its channels, on its platform, nor does Netflix, nor does Amazon or Disney Plus. So if you're trying to get an understanding of the audio video landscape, you swiftly hit and increasingly hit sort of technological, political, and commercial challenges that are quite difficult to resolve. And I think if we're looking at it from a kind of almost like a policy or a larger point of view, there's an interesting discussion to be had around how do we protect national culture whilst accurately representing national consumption? Because if we're honest, a lot of the consumption patterns are towards international channels, more so in Anglo-Canada, to be sure. And there's a lesson there too. So that's the main challenge is as the world's consumption becomes more international, that becomes difficult to measure and also becomes a policy and a kind of cultural concern at some point.
That's great. Thank you. Very helpful. And so I guess maybe turning to Leo as a kind of a follow-up question to your introductory remarks. I'm interested in maybe if you could speak to maybe an example of an org or maybe one or two organizations that have benefited from your service, just to make it even more kind of like tangible. If you could maybe point to a couple of beneficiaries of your service, just to kind of give us a little bit more detail around how that played out.
Sure, thanks, Jean-Noé. I think one of the kind of compelling examples that we that we've had since we started the program is that in the UK, the kind of outdoor arts sector was kind of festivals, community arts and place-based events. For a long time historically has been a kind of a poor relative in the kind of data ecosphere because of the difficulty in capturing or owning data around events in that type of space. And one thing that that came about as an opportunity by Audience Finder was the potential for organizations who are not ticketed. The go-to thing for kind of data analysis in the cultural sector was ticketing data for a long time. But for those organizations who don't ticket events and performances and such like, having a standardized data collection model around audience survey data where you could understand that the information that I'm capturing in the north of the country is on the same basis as organizations in the south or the east or across the sector was of real value and a real opportunity, because for the first time it enabled lots of organizations working across the country to gather a compelling body of knowledge as an aggregate, as well as learning about themselves individually. And I think what this had a couple of real practical implications after the first year or two of those organizations rolling out this type of approach. So to start with, it started people understanding the value of having data in the first instance. As I said, I think I said in my introduction, trying to communicate the value to somebody in something that they can't see is a really, really difficult thing. Once you've got some of it and you've got it in your hands and you can feel it and play with it, or on your computer screen, or however you want to kind of visualize it, it becomes a different proposition to understand. And once you can talk about what types of audience you are, what different groups of people they are, and that's the same language as other people are using. Oh, we're getting loads of these types of people, but not so many of those. And we have a segmentation system that runs across the whole of our platforms that enables exactly that type of language. And you compare the people that you are getting within your audience to the people at large in the catchment area, it starts to become really, really compelling information. So we're getting loads of these type of people, but not very many of these. And we're getting lots from this particular area and not so many from these. And there were a couple of kind of fairly quick byproducts of that for the outdoor arts as a sector. Firstly, they were able to demonstrate reasonably quickly how effective the outdoor arts across the UK are in engaging with their communities on their doorstep in a way that was different than other art forms or genres. For example, they were able to show compellingly, and to compare to performing arts, to music, to theatre, to so on, actually, that by presenting cultural opportunities in people's spaces, that they were having a degree of success that was really high in terms of engaging an audience that was reflective of the population within which they were offering. And in terms of social reach, that was really, really compelling. And the byproduct of that was that it enabled the sector to advocate for itself and its power in terms of social reach, and to start influencing policy decisions about investment in the outdoor arts, that was then able to grease the wheels of. And they were successful in achieving funding for the outdoor arts sector as a sector based on their ability to demonstrate their reach into those areas. Never mind all the other benefits that it has for each of those cultural providers individually about being able to understand their audiences and communication preferences, channels, all of those kind of things that come with having some audience understanding for me as an organization. But as a sector, we were also able to kind of fly the flag for the sector and influence policy decisions that can underpin the funding of those organizations because of what they do naturally very well through their art and through their engagement with people.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm gonna ask David also the same question, but after turning to Christian. Okay, so giving you a heads up, David, in terms of if you could point to some beneficiaries from your services and your organization. Christian, I wanted to ask you before going to David on the same topic. You're dealing with networks. Right, to support the establishment of data trusts. So I'd like to maybe ask you, from the work that you've done so far with Culture pour tous, can you talk about the trust element itself? How to build trust in kind of establishing the mindset within a network that's conducive to collaborating in the way that your program has been designed. How are these conversations playing out, or maybe what type of misperceptions or maybe issues that you're anticipating as you're kind of moving forward with your initiative?
Yeah, I think it's one of the key success factor is that network and that collaboration with the cultural sector. So that's one of the reasons, and also we see that there's a lot of different initiative of mutualization around. And I see that as a very good thing, because that means that the level of data literacy is growing. So that the network is very important for us to have to share first a common view on what we're aiming to do as a group too. So because it is a project like the mutualization and the trust itself needs a network to go forward, because we need to have a common ground on what the aim of that project is. So what we will use the data for, how and also give trust to people to share data without fear or suspicion. So I would have a question for Leo later about that, because we have that, and especially with Desjardins, the leaking of data in Desjardins. So some people are a bit suspicious about data sharing, and also all the bias that could be input in data management itself. So I think the network is very important for us for the success of that project, and especially it's to have like a data literacy to everyone. And that's why the network will help with having some other organization in the cultural with the cultural organization, like startup or tech company, and look to people that could have another point of view for that project. So yeah, so it's a key it's a key element for the success of the mutualization.
And what I like about your answer is also kind of pointing out that even though you're talking about, we're talking about data, but at the end of the day, it's also perceptions and misperceptions and kind of the human kind of factor that comes into kind of bringing people together and aligning around kind of shared objectives, and then kind of unlocking or kind of surpassing, those misperceptions as well. So, we've certainly found at Open North that we're kind of increasingly playing a role of like intermediary, to kind of putting ourselves on the side of the people we work with to help them kind of tell us, where they're at in terms of their own challenges and kind of addressing those needs. Yeah, great. So that resonates with me obviously as well. So David, I wanted to kind of, turn back to you and maybe give you an opportunity to kind of speak to, some of the, either the impact or kind of the beneficiaries of the work that you're doing, to maybe point to some, one or two examples, just like Leo had the chance to do before.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I had one of those glorious slight moments of panic when you're like, how on earth am I going to answer this question? Because it seems like it should be top of my mind. Like, well, of course, everyone benefits from my data. And you're like, oh, actually, so thank you for making me panic. It certainly increased my heart rate and slightly maybe helped me lose weight. So thanks for that. But I guess the way I'd answer it is I'm going to go on a bit of a winding route, but bear with me. So one thing I find fascinating about data is it's a means to an end, and it's much more art than science. So we're in a world now I tend to call data it didn't happen, where data has to underpin anything. And like Leo was saying, that can be good if you have it and terrible if you don't. So the fact that Leo is able to offer data on someone somehow increase their ability to show the value of what they do, which is weird in a way. The value should be just sort of so evident, but we live in an age increasingly where a number is the most important way of showing your value of something, which is something we could debatable and you can definitely discuss. So if I think about, okay, data is fundamentally a means to an end, and it's kind of subjective, and I think about how have we benefited, who's benefited from our data? The numerous data and its previous incarnation before that has existed since like 1944, and what it predominantly does is sort of in a way reduces conflict, which sounds an odd thing to say, but it came up around a trade where someone who owned a radio station said, I think you should pay me this amount for an ad. And the buyer was like, I'm paying you that. And then the radio station said, well, I'll do a survey. And this many people listened to it. And then the buyer said, well, I'm not going to believe that because you did the survey. And so they went, what are we going to do? So they came up with an independent organization that said, well, okay, we'll tell you how many people, and you can't argue about it. So in a way that the primary function of the data is to facilitate, to make trade a bit easier, because you have one less thing to argue about, which is how many people listen to you or watched your show. You can argue about how much that's worth, sure, but you have one less thing to argue about. So, and that sort of underpins $5 billion of trading in Canada. That's what the ad market between TV and video, not counting digital pure play platforms, is worth. So I go, well, maybe we've benefited, whoever's benefited from $5 billion worth of advertising. But I think it is an interesting point that if you're not part of that system, if you're not part of the ecosystem, it becomes difficult. If you're not large enough, or if you're excluded from that system for whatever reason, and increasingly, like I said at the start, if people choose to not be part of that system, so if Netflix, Google, Facebook choose not to be part of that system, then the benefit is reduced, and also people who would benefit from them being part of that system don't. So if you're a creator, you don't get to see how many people go across, or you're dependent back on pre-1944 days on someone who's come up with the data telling you how many people watched it, which is like, hold on, didn't we create a whole ecosystem to prevent that happening? So we're at a really interesting tipping point that in some ways is just going back to pre-1944 days, which is, well, there are some people who, like, if you want to know how many people your show reached, well, I'm going to tell you because I measured it. It's kind of weird, because there's an interesting history repeating itself point. I know, very long discursive answer, but hopefully there was something of interest there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I saw Leo kind of nodding a few times here. I'm wondering, Leo, any kind of comments or any kind of additional kind of comments to layer into what David just shared here? Oh, your mic is, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sorry, it had to happen sooner or later. I thought it was really interesting, about the potential to come back full circle to where you were in that situation whereby you're back at the kind of behest of the strongest player in the field with the most compelling data. I mean, my data is bigger than yours, and it's into that kind of a marketplace. And I think I was nodding along because I recognise, within our place in the UK as we sit at the moment, one of the things which I think, and this kind of crosses the previous point and the one about trust as well, I think a little bit, is that the audience agency is a not-for-profit organisation which has helped us, I think, in terms of both of those things, in terms of being slightly objective about the data that we hold, and being able to allay some of the suspicions about what it is that we might do with it, because we fundamentally, we're a charitable organisation and we perceive ourselves as holding that data in kind or in trust for the sector to benefit from it themselves. So we don't commercialise the data, and we use it purely for analytical purposes. So there's nobody whose data that could potentially come into our system whereby we'd follow that data through to its endpoint and end up communicating directly with them to sell X, Y, or Z, or them receiving stuff that they wouldn't have expected to or unexpected. It kind of, all of that is kind of managed in the kind of data minimization and governance processes. But even so, winning that trust was still a hard-fought journey, because people are fundamentally suspicious about what you're doing with that data. Mm-hmm. And some of it has to do with the understanding of what it is. And I think people understand that data is powerful, and that, the point that David was saying about, I can tell you X, Y, and Z because I've got your data. Actually, that both excites and scares the living daylights out of people as well, because the data is really, really powerful, and you could put it to nefarious purposes, but you could also use it for really, really good purposes. In terms of making sure that people are offered stuff that's relevant to them, rather than just, being spammed with junk that's, just the delete button gets sent away. However, people's fear around changing their behaviors in the way that you use that data is kind of palpable, in terms of, reduce your mailing list size, for example. No, I don't want to do that. I want to get the maximum value from it, but nobody's responding to it. So wouldn't you be much better having a much, much smaller one that was better targeted? It's a real learning journey, that whole getting into data, and it all starts with with that process about what are you setting out to do with it, how are you transparent about that, and how do you gain trust through that whole process is kind of at the center of everything we're talking about.
So maybe if I just add to that, Jean-Noé, sorry, there's another thing I think about, which is like, data is what we call, I always think of it like a cognitive bully. So if you're in a kind of a dispute between 2 points of view, whether they're held by different people or by yourself, it's really hard to take the argument of which doesn't have data. And I think increasingly so. And I think, again, if you're thinking about kind of cultural output and cultural significance and that kind of stuff, there's a risk to that, because data basically ends up being like volumetric. So the more people, the better, tends to be the argument. And if more people consume something or could consume something, it seems to be that, well, therefore we should do that. And that's a very limited and limiting way of assessing value. And I think we need to be, the phrase data literacy came out in an earlier conversation. I think that part of data literacy is realizing that data can actually, however good it is, can only tell you so much about something. And we're in danger, because I think in large part because of who the dominant companies are in our world right now, of having an oversized view of how much data can explain. And I think individually, corporately, and at a larger scale, we need to sort of put data in its correct place, which is it's very good at some things, but it has limits. And if not, I think we'll end up with a very homogeneous, flat one size fits all kind of culture, because you end up favoring large over anything else. So I think danger with data is it appears to be neutral, and it's the last thing that's neutral. So we really need to understand how it fits, not just understand it mechanically, but how it fits in our decision making at individual, corporate, and national level, I think.
That's an excellent point. And for me, it also speaks to, and just, the barriers of engagement into a conversation about data. And when knowing full well, that we're dealing with like just data ecosystems now with a huge amount of volume of data and the velocity of data, the ubiquity of data. So all those things make it even more difficult to engage, new actors to benefit from kind of data sharing or different types of kind of services and whatnot. I'm wondering around, just maybe, Christian, I'm not sure if you want to add anything on like data literacy as well, because I think that seems to be kind of a key part of that journey to be able to kind of reap the benefits of the approaches that we're talking about here. And any thoughts on kind of data literacy, things that you've picked up, maybe approaches, things that you're kind of maybe, preparing, maybe trainings or things like that to kind of onboard and make it more inclusive?
Yeah, right now it's a bit too soon to talk about like what we're gonna do, but effectively there's a lot of discrepancy, like the differences between some organization or some region. Like I think about like some region are like much more ahead on understanding and putting some tools to gather that information, and also to share that information and the data. So and some organizations are just way back and don't understand what exactly. So we have to, one of the aim of that project is also to level the knowledge, so everyone understand on the same ground key concept, what it means, and also to go ahead with what David was saying. If I can make an analogy, when we do information monitoring, we try to automatizing it, so we don't spend too much time on serendipity. So, but on doing that, we miss a lot of information, and we can also be in a kind of a chamber of echo. So I think we have to effectively use data has a meaning, like to use for like a business intelligence or like discoverability, but also we have to use other like intuition and like understanding from like serendipity for information monitoring. So yeah, there's a balance there too. Yeah.
Great, I appreciate that. That's an important note to all of us. I'm wondering, Leo, in hindsight, kind of looking back, and maybe I can ask the same question to David as well. Like in hindsight, looking back at the work that you've done over the years, what would you have done differently? Or if you were able to kind of write yourself an email, to say like, hey, note to self, when you're about to enter into, like this territory of work, be mindful of, what are the kinds of things that you would have kind of wish you would have been able to hear from yourself,
I think Leo should take that. I've no idea what to say.
Gosh, I think one of the things that's really changed and is changing, I think it's a dynamic and it's a spectrum really, is people's kind of propensity to understand and use data. So some of it is about the kind of data literacy piece that you've just been talking about, understanding how it can be useful or why it can be useful, but also what you would practically do with it. But there's also then linked to the kind of governance, what can you do with the data, and what's it okay to do. And I think that a lot of times, more in the past than now, I have to say, and one of the things that's changed is that people shut down the possibility of using data for kind of fear around either what they can or can't do, or what they can get away with in the kind of old language around the way in which data protection, permissioning worked, and so on. And therefore, weren't prepared to kind of take risks in some ways with data, not risks that are kind of against compliance, but to kind of understand what it is that you should be doing around compliance to enable you to do the things that you want to do with that data, and really to put the data subjects, the people whose data that is about, at the heart of what it is that you're trying to do. So I think that quite often in the past, people would use data protection as an excuse not to do stuff. Now, I can't share this information with you because data protection legislation won't let me. And that was just an easy kind of way of going, no, I don't want to, without really kind of thinking about why you should do that and what the benefits could be to you if you do. There was a lot of, in the UK cultural sector, there's a long history of organisations being really proprietorial about their data, thinking that because I own these mailing lists or these ticketing inventories and so on, I own these audiences, and I don't want to let anybody else have that information because then they'll steal my audiences. And I think one thing that's changed over time, and I think it's still changing to a degree, but I think we are moving in that right direction, is that organizations understand that they're part of an ecosphere offering a cultural offer, and that you don't own those audiences, and actually we can communicate the cultural offer en masse more effectively than we can as individuals. And that works better if we start being quite so proprietorial over those data sets, which honestly aren't ours anyway. And actually, the other side of that, the flip side, I talked about it earlier, when we were coming up to GDPR, so this was the new data protection regulation in Europe, it dawned on people really late in the day. We had the 2-year transition period, but everyone thought that was a kind of, the law's not going to change, we don't have to do anything until that point in time. But actually what it meant was you had this 2-year period during which time you were supposed to get your house in order so that you could continue to operate as you want to beyond the time that the legislation started to become enforceable. So as May the 25th, 2018, which was the date for that approach, lots of cultural organizations were going, oh no, does this mean that I can't mail my mailing list anymore unless I've actually specifically got their permission to do so? And everybody's just kind of going, yep, that's what it means. You now have to do this thing that you've been avoiding doing for years, which is asking your audiences whether they actually want to talk to you or not. And actually, that's quite a fundamental thing, leave alone what it is that they actually want to talk to you about. But actually, this fear of having smaller lists was kind of palpable. Leave alone actually having conversations with our audiences about, would you like to talk to us? What would you like to talk to us about? What could I tell you about that would be of interest to you, and so on? And actually realizing that those types of conversations with our audiences are going to be far more valuable and to our audiences and to ourselves as cultural organizations. That just being kind of transparent, I think that would be my key learning. Think about the possibilities, think about the parameters that you have to operate with. Think about being transparent, and then be really creative about the way in which you want to use the data, and do it more. Don't be scared of it. Do it more would be what I'd have told myself years ago, I think, and everybody that I was talking to.
I've had some time. I've come up with something, but it's not going to be as good as Leo's. So mine's much more grubby and cynical than Leo's, I think. So I think if I've learned something over the last few years, is that the form factor of data is as, if not more important than the data. So, and I think for too long, many sectors, and I'm thinking particularly about mine, which is broadcast, have argued what is the right argument, but the least useful argument, which is the data on data quality. And the broadcast data quality and integrity is like very high. And so, especially when digital platforms first started out, their data was pretty dodgy, and it is still. There are elements of it that are pretty dodgy, and so I think we began to fight the battle, if you like, on that front, which was, hold on, quality is the most important thing. And actually, that wasn't the most important battle for a lot of the consumers of that data. It was like, how easy is it to access? How useful is it to me? Does it talk in my language or the language of the people who create the data? And I think if you wrap that up into form factor, large advertisers will complain about Facebook data, but it doesn't stop them buying Facebook. So because the form factor they receive that data is really useful for them, it's in a easy to access, easy to understand format that speaks their language. So it sounds a bit grubby and cynical, but I think it's more a reflection of the fact that, again, data is a means to an end. And so my advice to myself, if I would give it, would to be, again, to concentrate on how it's presented as much as the quality of the data itself.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Great. I think that's cynical, but it's an important point nevertheless here. I think it's, let's make sure to capture those as well. I really like and it actually kind of resonated with my own kind of journey in this space, in the data space in Canada and internationally. Leo, what you mentioned around the shift between, perceptions of like ownership and like a responsible custodian type of mindset, and which kind of speaks to, well, what's in it for me, and what responsibility do I have in terms of curating good quality data that is obviously good for the the workings of my organization, but actually by sharing it under the right kind of enabling conditions, there's something that I can actually benefit from, as well as benefiting others in the sector itself. So there's like an approach there that I think is important to note. Just wondering if anybody's listening and that has any questions, please don't be shy to ask us in the chat. There was one question that was asked here, if I may just kind of turn to it now. I think we've touched on it, but if there's anything to add, please feel free to do so. So it says, how do you, comment faire en sorte que les contributeurs aux données d'une organisation se sentent interpellés par la mutualisation? So the question in English would be, how do you ensure, or how do you navigate with contributors to data? So however you want to interpret that, so people that are either kind of collecting data or sharing data, so that they feel that there is something to gain from sharing data in a data trust, or sharing data in some sort of process that isn't only beneficial to themselves. I think that's like the tension between individual and kind of collective kind of benefits. If you can maybe kind of speak to some of that.
Yeah, I can refer to that too, on my point of view. I think that the cost of gathering or even managing data as an organization is way much higher than the value you can get from it, because we need a lot of data to make a sense of it, or to collect a tendency, or to use it. So sharing it is the mutualization. Give an opportunity to mutualize the cost, but also the value of the data, and we see it like for discoverability or for algorithm. More data you have, more it is accurate or relevant. So even as the point of view of one organization, they will benefit from that. And also, I think like, and also we have like protocol in governance to how to use the data and everything. But I think sharing the data like that would benefits in terms of innovation. There's some stuff that will come up that we don't predict right now, but that can come up by the sharing of that information, the data. So yeah, I think it's beneficial for individual organization, as a sector, as the cultural sector.
And it's kind of difficult sometimes to kind of put your hope or faith into a potential benefit that you can't necessarily point to from a data sharing perspective and say trust the process, and then there may be some outcomes that will be beneficial to you. Yeah. And that's like kind of making the case and kind of stepping into a bit of a void there. Wondering if there's any experiences that maybe Leo or David you've encountered in kind of not necessarily inspiring, but kind of getting the buy-in to making that investment that isn't necessarily kind of strictly self-interested here.
It's not always easy. In fact, it's usually, I don't know why I particularly ended up being the dirty, cynical person here, but like, I think it really has to, at some point, have to go back to self-interest. Now, whether that self-interest is, well, a rising tide of floats or boats, and therefore I need the tide to rise, then I think it still ultimately comes back to how will I benefit from this? How will my company benefit from that? And so part of that, I think, is figuring out what benefits are they particularly interested in. So it doesn't necessarily need to be monetary. It could be one of influence. It could be one of relevance, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, we do act, and we do tend to act in our self-interest. And I think the ideal is you can have a crossover and intersection between those two things, that actually in helping the broader ecosystem, that's the best way of helping. And we have these arguments all the time, because you know what the broadcast industry needs to do is act collectively, but that's a really hard thing for them to do, understandably, because the shareholders of Bell don't care about the shareholders of Rogers, quite the opposite. So how do you make the case to a Rogers or a Bell that actually it's in their interests to act collectively, when culturally that's a hard thing for competitive companies to do? So it's, and you see this across the world, and again in the broadcast industry. And what's interesting is you are seeing more coming together of, you're seeing more lions laying down with lambs than you ever have, because they have a common threat that's larger than them. But it's a hard discussion to have, but it has to come down to framing it around their self-interest somehow.
Mm-hmm. Leo, did you want to add to that? I'm sure you've got some experience navigating those waters too.
I think that's I think I'd echo the thoughts of colleagues on the panel. Actually, I think it is about understanding what the value is for you from doing this, because there is definitely a cost to gathering, managing, and being responsible about data, that you have to understand the value payoff for it. In, again, back to a UK example, for years and years we had a scenario where there were arguments going on between touring companies and venues where their work was being presented about sharing the data between those two, so that the touring company could benefit or have direct access with audiences as well, and the venues didn't want to give that data away, because it was that thing I said earlier about being proprietary. These are our audiences, we don't want to give them to you, but actually they're the shared audiences, and everybody wins if we can find the best way of engaging with them. But again, as a result of GDPR, kind of a lot of that conversation kind of went away, because to have that audience data and to manage it responsibly, touring organizations then had to think about, okay, well who would manage this data if we had it? How would we secure it? Who would be responsible for managing the governance of it? How would we respond to a data subject access request? What would we do if who would be our data protection officer? The whole bunch of considerations come around having this data and managing it. And if you're going to invest in that, you have to think, what are we going to do with it? Okay, if we're going to have this information, how is it going to be valuable to us? And is it going to be valuable enough for us to invest that time in it? Or is there another way of getting what we need from the data that's less costly but equally beneficial? So we've been able to kind of help some of those aspects by enabling audience analytical sharing that doesn't require the sharing backward and forth of personal information. But you still, at the end of the day, need to be able to act on that data for it to be something other than just noise that sits in a corner aching to be looked at by somebody. Really interestingly, since COVID started, we've started doing some kind of intelligent analysis of open text survey response data that we've got. So we've been just kind of looking at it semantically and kind of organizing survey responses of experience into things that are positive, negative, neutral, and so on. And when you look at some of the responses that come back around performances, some of the earliest performances to open up after theatres were opening again, you get some positive ones going, this is fantastic. Really liked the social distancing in the auditorium. Thought it was about too much, actually. We could have made people a little bit closer together. And then you looked at the kind of negative comments and somebody was going, those people who were shouting on the stage, they shouldn't have been shouting so much, surely. That was irresponsible. And you kind of think, well, how are you going to kind of mitigate that stuff? So as David came back, said, it takes a kind of creative response to respond to the data in a way that's going to be useful to you, but you need to do it. Equally, there's, if you're going to ask for feedback of that type from your audiences, you can't ignore it. If audiences are saying, the bar was absolutely rammed and I couldn't get a drink, and someone's given you that response, and you don't look at the data and you don't do anything about it, you're just going to keep annoying your audiences or ignoring them to the point where they're not your audiences anymore. So you have to have the time to look at the data to make it better for people. The flip side is you've got a fantastic opportunity to make it better for people if you can invest the time in it. So it really is a kind of, what do I give and what do I get?
That's great. I appreciate that. So we're getting close to the hour, and I want to give the chance to each of our panelists maybe to have just concluding kind of observations, whether it's, from the discussion itself that we've had, maybe things that have been said, between the different kind of interactions on different topics that we've covered. We've talked about issues around kind of the value of data. We've named some risks. Leo, you've taken us into kind of GDPR and the repercussions of that. Talked about access and ownership. There's a lot of key topics that have come out in the course of our just a single hour here with the four of us. So maybe just let's do kind of a round just to kind of wrap things up. Final kind of thoughts and observations. And maybe the way that I could frame it would be, let's think of maybe some of the smaller kind of actors in the sector, and kind of let's think of not necessarily the bigger players that have a huge capacity, that can already have teams that can do a lot of this work on their own. Maybe some observations on how smaller organizations can join in on some of the work that you've all been doing. Who would like to start?
I can start if you want. So I think a few bits and bobs. So one is, I guess my advice would be that you can't not understand data anymore. And I did arts degree and arts masters, and so at some level fairly innumerate, and yet end up running a company that does data and software. And I think that's the way that the world has gone and is going, is that data used to be a specialized function in part of someone's job. And my advice to all my clients now is actually, it doesn't matter where you are in any company, you need to understand data. And, funny enough, we've got lots of data around us to train us in. Everyone is looking probably on a daily basis at the COVID numbers. That's a really good example of how do we interpret fast moving data, and how does data visualization change our interpretation of the data, and how does that change our behavior as a result? So I think train yourself in how to understand data. It would be whatever role you're in and whatever size your company is, or you are as a sector, if you like. It's critical that everyone understands it, from creatives all the way through. The second bit is slightly more practical, that because we're living in a world of data, there are so many good, free, cheap tools out there to help you understand data. So, produced by some massive companies like Google, or produced by sort of the smaller companies in the middle. So avail yourself of all the fantastic tools that are out there to help you understand it, but first understand it philosophically and sort of from an abstract, how do I make this part of how I understand the world, make decisions in it? And then secondly, take advantage of all the great tools that are out there. And there will be more of them because the world is going that way.
Thank you. That's great. Who wants to go next? Final thoughts here, Leo or Christian? Christian, do you want to go?
Yeah, can go. To conclude for that, I would say to go with a collective intelligence or collaborative intelligence, and to put the efforts together. I remember when I was in the book industry, I wanted to have for each author an URL. So a web, everyone had their own. It's very hard to do that. And authors want to write, they want to do their thing, and they don't give that importance to doing that. Some organization is also very dedicated to if their venue or thing to produce what they're good at. And if data is important, it's true, but it's very a side kick for them. So I think that's where a project that gathers all the information, that put people together to share expertise and things like that, it is important, because to put the burden on small organization to master, I think it is quite complex. I've been I've just tried to wrap my head around the project for 3 weeks now, and it's not that easy. And I've been working with metadata and big data for years, and so I can understand for a small organization to just give up. So we're there. I think as a collectivity, we have to be there for them and take them where they are.
Don't give up. That's the what a key message. Maybe Leo, final observations, and then I've got just some quick closing remarks for our audience here. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jean-Noé. I think kind of pulling those you know, the points from my co-panelists together, really. I think that when David was talking about, you know, the volume and the big players in the data becoming the kind of monopolists around that data, and the potential to mutualize the data, to build collaborative approaches, are the opportunity for the cultural sector to make sure that we have a stake in that future, I think. So thinking about standards around, you know, data standards themselves and interoperability, and how organizations can collaborate more and more often and more easily in order to build that collective herd knowledge, I think would be my kind of closing thought to kind of keep going, keep working on, and to keep thinking about how we can creatively make use of all of that data that's kind of sitting there and growing and becoming ever more attainable.
Great. I think that'll be our final kind of observation. I want to thank all three of our excellent panelists, David, Christian, Leo. Thank you very much for this great kind of dynamic kind of exchange that we've had over the course of the last hour. Here's you should see in front of you a poll, a survey that's been put to you. We want to be able to, since this is about data, want to be able to collect a little bit of data to get a sense of, you know, how the conversation went for you. And the question is, are you satisfied with the activity you just participated in? And I also want to remind our audience, as we're getting the results, you know, to encourage you to participate in other sessions that are being organized as part of this event, and as well as benefiting from other kind of networking activities. The next conference will be on Be Seen and Heard. Next activities to register. What do funders measure, and developing your digital strategy with data. So all good topics. Don't miss it. And again, thank you very much to our three panelists and for our audience. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, au revoir. Thank you.
Right. Au revoir.
Thanks.
Au revoir.